It had been a horrible day, absolutely the worst. It was raining. Only that cold rain that you find in Illinois that when it gets on the back of your head dribbles down inside your coat. It was right after Thanksgiving, and I had put off buying my Secret Santa gifts, so I had to go to the mall. Stepped in a puddle when I got out of the car, sneezed. Some of my children had given me a cold at school. I was not a happy camper, but I did see a group of seniors who were getting back on their bus to go back to their nursing home. And one old man dropped his wallet. So I hustled across the parking lot to pick it up, but the bus was already gone. So I stuffed it in my pocket, went into the mall, and did my shopping. Got my presents all wrapped up, and I didn't wear that coat again until after Christmas. I reached into the pocket and I found that wallet. It was one of those kits, you know, the ones that you get two pieces and you whip them together with that vinyl thread. Well, inside that wallet was a business card of a man named Mike Wilson. And also, the only other thing in there was a letter with a return address in Milwaukee from a young lady named Mary Leach. And so what I did was I opened it up just to see if I could find a clue that maybe this was the Mike Wilson whose card was in the wallet. Apparently it was, but I was enthralled by the letter. It was written by a young lady, and you could tell it was childish cursive. And she said, "Dear Mike, I'm sorry. My father says that I can't marry you. I can't even date you right now. I know you're leaving for Vietnam, but I have to stay here, and Father doesn't even want me to write to you while you're gone. He says 15 is too young for 18. So I have to say goodbye. But I want you to know, I never told you in person, but I do love you. Love, Mary." The letter had been creased several different times, and it was beginning to fade on the folds. Well, I couldn't let this go by. I had to find Mike Wilson. I didn't see the name of the bus, so I started looking. I went through all of the nursing homes in the phone book, and I called and I said, "This is the story. I found a wallet, and inside it identifies the owner as Mike Wilson. Do you have a Mike Wilson?" "No, ma'am, we don't." "Would you happen to have a Mary Leach?" "No, ma'am, we don't." I called half a dozen nursing homes in the central Illinois area. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll move outside of Bloomington Normal. And I knew of a place up in Pontiac, which is about 35 miles away. So I called and I said, "This is my story." And the answer came back, "Why, yes, we do have a Mike Wilson here." I said, "Is he a Vietnam veteran? Do you know?" "Yes, he is. He was a colonel." "A colonel, okay. He must have stayed in the Army after the war." And so I said, "I'd like to talk to him, or better yet, I'd like to return the wallet to him. Can you set that up for me?" And a very nice lady said, "Sure. Please drive out on Saturday afternoon, and I will make sure that Mike is here and you can return his wallet." I said, "Thank you." And I drove up. I got out, I met the nice lady I talked to on the phone. She introduced me to the very stand-up colonel. And he was in a suit with a tie, and he had his ribbons on his breast pocket. And I told him that I'd found the wallet, and when I'd found it, and he said he was so happy to have it back. And I said, "Did you ever find Mary?" And he said, "No. I went back to Milwaukee on my first leave. Her father had been transferred, and nobody knew where they went." He said, "This was almost 50 years ago." I said, "Oh, I am so sorry to hear about that." And the nice lady from the phone said, "Mary who?" I said, "Well, the envelope is from Mary Leach." And she said, "Well, we have a Mary Leach here. She moved in not too long ago. In fact, I think I saw her going into the dining room. Let's go see." And so we crossed the hallway into the dining room, and there was a lady sitting in a wheelchair, waiting to be served her lunch. And all of a sudden, I heard the gasp from Mike. And I saw him reach out past me, and he said, "Mary?" And she looked up, and she said, "Mike!" 50 years had spanned the time that they hadn't seen each other, and yet they recognized each other. They clasped their hands and smiled such a beautiful smile. I came to know Mike and Mary after that. Neither one of them had ever married. They had no children. And they adopted me at 33. And I would come to visit them, and I would talk to them, and I would hear their stories about where they'd been and what it was like to grow up in Milwaukee, because that was 300 miles from where we were. Mary's father had been with State Farm Insurance, and he'd come to work at the home office in Bloomington. Mike had retired because he was an engineer, and he had come to work in Bloomington as an engineer with General Electric. Well, Mary had gotten her teaching certificate and moved away, so their paths had never crossed. Every time I came and I sat with them, they always would sit side by side. And all the time, they held hands. They always had to be in contact with each other. It was almost a year later when they decided they wanted to get married. And it took some people by surprise. After all, this is an older couple. They could live together in the nursing home, and the nursing home would accommodate the fact that they could share quarters, but they wanted to be married. And so I stood up for them. They were as beautiful as any spring bride and groom. It was about 18 months later when Mary's health, which had never been robust, began to fail. And so what Mary did was she was in her wheelchair more and more, and finally she passed away. Within a month, Mike followed her. Whenever I'm in Bloomington, I always go to their grave. You see, they had picked a special headstone for themselves. Mike and Mary, hands clasped forever.